Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Project Cambridge podcast, episode 3, would you believe it? And today we're welcoming Marcus Scott from Superdielectrics. Now, as usual, before we say hi to Marcus, I'm just going to recap on what we aim to achieve through the podcast. So it's all about bringing you cool stuff going on in the Cambridge area, talking to some really interesting people, talking about some fascinating tech, which obviously we're going to be doing today, and obviously science, and also sort of how our city's growing, and other ways that you can get involved as well, and just have some brilliant conversations, really. So it's also really important that we want to use quite basic tech language so that we can make this as inclusive and accessible for everybody. So today, Marcus and I are going to be picking apart some really cool tech, actually. So if you've got any questions or comments, if you could pop them in the comments boxes below, we'd love to hear your feedback, and also any questions that you've got. We'd love to come back to you and answer those, either myself or Marcus. So yeah, please pop any questions that you've got in the box. One final thing, we're not in a studio, as you can see today. I'm at home, Marcus is in his office. And so there might be some slight interruptions, cats and things like that. So please bear with us if there's anything like that today. So without further ado, I'd love to warmly welcome Marcus Scott from Superdielectrics. Hi, Marcus.
Hi, Jen. Lovely to see you again, and looking forward to our chat.
Thank you very, very much for coming on. So if you don't know Superdielectrics, they're based just south of Cambridge on the Chesterford Research Park. They've been there for quite a few years now. And Marcus actually joined the company about 4 years ago, Marcus?
Yeah, roughly, yep.
Yeah, so as the financial director. Now, don't let this financial background fool you. He is actually brilliant at explaining all the technical side of what the company does. And, we're just really incredibly grateful to Marcus for joining us today, so to talk through the technology. So, Marcus, Superdielectrics are developing supercapacitors, which are energy storage technology, clean, affordable, sustainable. And I didn't really know what supercapacitors were till I spoke to Marcus a few years ago. So can you tell us, in really, really basic kind of layman's terms, what is a supercapacitor? What is it? Why is it different to a battery? And what's with the contact lens? What's it got to do with that?
Yeah, happy to do that. I'm going to walk through it in pretty basic terms, and apologies to those who tune in who do have a science background and think it's too basic, and apologies to those without any science background who might think the exact opposite. So I'll try and pitch at a level where hopefully most people will be able to find that accessible. A supercapacitor uses physics to store energy. So you can imagine, I think probably most of us have done the experiment where you get a balloon and you rub it on your jumper and it creates static, and use that to stick it on a wall. That is effectively how it's doing it. But the problem is that has a very low energy density. In other words, the amount of energy that you can store in 1 kilogram. So if you think, for example, you need quite a high energy density in your phone battery because you want it to be small and you want to put it in your pocket. Whereas if it was sitting in a corner and it was being used for stationary energy storage, it wouldn't really matter. But those supercapacitors still got a big market. They're roughly about $3 billion a year, but most people have never heard of one. I mean, we've probably got a couple of capacitors in our phone and various other places, but most people have never really heard of them. A battery also stores electricity, but it does it through a chemical process using chemistry and a chemical reaction. So charges, discharges, recharges, and you can only do that for so long, and you have to treat them quite carefully. And if you use solar and wind, then they can get worn out very quickly because all renewables fluctuate. Even on a very sunny day with the sun out, you'll see that the amount of energy that you're getting really fluctuates, and that it doesn't work well with batteries. But we use them every day. Most people are aware of their limitations. You shouldn't stab things in them. But we're also aware that we need to be very careful because a lot of the materials are damaging to the environment. There are difficulties in recycling. So they aren't really a good long-term solution. And our device is a mixture of the two. So we have some capacitor elements and some battery elements. Our chemistry has about the same potential as lithium-ion batteries, the ones we sort of see and use everywhere. But we've only been developing it for about 5 years. Lithium-ion have been developing it for about 50 years. So we haven't got as far in terms of that energy density as lithium-ion. But ours are made from very simple materials: carbon, hydrocarbons, and water. And in fact, they're about 50% by weight water. So that's the kind of one of the big, really important things about it. So I hope that's about right, Jen. Is that sort of the level that we should be working at?
Yeah, that's very easy to understand, Marcus. I like it.
Good.
Brilliant. So when we sort of talking about applications and things like that, do you want to walk us through what sort of applications that can be used in?
Yeah, and I'll come back to the thing about the contact lenses, because that's a nice little story. But we can do
Contact
that later on if you like. Yeah, exactly.
If anybody's listening to us and not watching them on video, I've got some contact lenses in my hand for props purposes. Marcus is going to tell us the relevance with those.
Yeah. I will do. Well, I'll do that first, because it's a nice little story. A long time ago, back in the 1970s, there was a thing called the Warsaw Pact, which was the union of all the Soviet countries before the Soviet Union broke up in 1989. And they had plans to invade Europe at any stage. They were just getting ready if they ever wanted to invade Europe. But about 20% of all of their soldiers wore glasses. So they had to work out how to get people in a hazmat suit, which, because if they had chemical weapons and all that kind of stuff, I had to work out how people could wear hazmat suits for about 7 days. Yeah, I mean, you can imagine how uncomfortable that would have been, but that was the period they reckon it would take them to get all the way to the Atlantic. And the only way they could do it was by having extended wear contact lenses. So they tried to develop these contact lenses that you could put in your eyes for a long period of time, but they didn't manage it, and they gave up in the end. And a guy called Dr. Don Highgate, who's now in his late 80s, he saw that he thought he could solve the problem with this patent. And so he bought the patent and he developed these extended wear contact lenses. And in the 1980s, him and his business partner managed to get about 10% of the UK contact lens market in a few years with these particular ones. They developed these extended wear ones, and he ended up selling the company and went off and did other stuff. And in the 1990s, he realized that if he could make it what's called ionically conductive, so a different material that was ionically conductive, but in the same overall category of materials, then if he could discover that, he could use that to make an electrolyzer or a fuel cell, which he did, and that was the basis of another company that I used to work for called ITM Power. He then tried to make them electrically conductive. So they've got this sort of long 50 or so year history, which is really, really kind of weird and comes from a totally left field area. But I just thought I'd put that story in, because it just shows you never know where these inventions are going to come from.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And just stumbling across this technology to make it applicable to energy storage is just crazy.
Yeah, pretty crazy.
How science often works. No, that's an amazing story. Yeah, you okay, Marcus, to talk to us about the kind of applications that could be supercapacitors could be potentially used in? I mean, I'm thinking obviously EV. Yeah. But I know there's a lot more applications than that.
Yeah, I mean, really anything that uses electricity, this could be applicable to. But obviously, as I mentioned, we've only been doing lithium-ion, have been probably about 50 years. So we at the moment, and I'll explain this in a little bit more detail later on about how this works, but at the moment we're focused on what's called stationary storage. So anything where it's not moving about, and in particular on domestic energy storage, where at the moment by buying a battery, you can save 85% of your energy bill. And you can do that by storing energy when it's at cheap rate and using it when it's at peak rate. And our goal is to make stored renewable energy cheaper than fossil fuel energy. That's really where we want to focus, and where we think that we can do, so that we can assist this transition to this new energy environment that we're going to be in. So without subsidies, just real economics, and that's hence the tie-up with E.ON that I think, Jen, you wanted to talk a little bit about later on.
Yeah, definitely. We'll move on to that. I mean, who doesn't want to save 85% on their energy bills? That'd be amazing. So obviously you guys are concentrating on the stationary storage, but I'm guessing that at some point in the future we could be able to power an aircraft, maybe?
Yeah, I think so. I think anything that uses electricity, or anything that is mobile, once we've got that energy density higher, we'll be able to do it, because obviously there's a certain tipping point where if the batteries are too heavy, it doesn't make sense carrying them around. And I think, I don't know, I drove a van that had some very old lead acid batteries in it back in the 2000s, and you were in a bit of a panic because it only had a range of about 40 miles. So as you sort of halfway through the journey, you were starting to get a bit panicky. But obviously now, they've got much longer ranges and they've got much better energy density. But once we get that energy density higher, it could be aerial transport. They're talking about vertical takeoff and lift-off taxis. So, and that's a bit of a cliche, but really the sky is the limit. And the reason we're focused on where we are now with E.ON is our technology is already commercially viable in the home energy storage market. But over the last 4 years, we've increased the energy density about 10 times. So it's now 10 times bigger than it was before. And we expect to make further big improvements in energy storage. So that's the kind of angle that we're focusing on. But that, shall I talk a little bit about the thing with E.ON and what we're trying to do there? Would that make sense?
Oh, Jen? Yes, please. That'd be great if you could do that.
Yeah, of course. Well, at the moment, a lot of people have heard about this concept of fuel poverty, and a lot of people are in the throes of that and suffering from it. And there's about 2.7 million households in the UK that are estimated to live in fuel poverty. In other words, they can't afford to heat their own homes or use the electricity that they need. And our view is that clean energy transition isn't just about the environment. It's got to be about economics too. But if renewable energy is reliable and cheaper, then people are going to choose it simply because they're going to be better off by doing so. So our goal is to make sure that stored renewable energy is cheaper than fossil fuels. And, taking that system that I talked about earlier on with that 85% saving, you simply do that by storing cheap rate electricity and using it at peak times. There's a company called Give Energy that is in the UK that does this, and there's various other companies. There's another really cool Cambridge company which you might want to have on your show at some stage, called Geo, and they're based in Hardwick, and they've sold about 10 million in-home displays. And they did a project for DESNZ, the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, and that showed massive savings even 5 years ago, and that's got better as the price of electricity has gone up. Obviously those savings have gone up, and now we're going to have flexible tariffs coming in. As it's difficult to control when the renewables are available, so people are going to have cheaper tariffs at certain times of the day. But to be honest, it doesn't require you to have solar. All it requires you to have is storage. And at the same time as all of this happening, the price of that solar is going down massively. So now I think the IEA, which is the big international organization that sort of talks about international energy, said that in a good location, solar is now the cheapest form of energy that mankind has ever known. So that's just amazing, really. And those global markets for storing energy, so either from solar or from wind or from anything else, those global markets for storing energy are already in the hundreds of billions of dollars a year and growing. And I know that sounds big, but if you think about what that means for the application of the technology, our view is that in 1980, well, actually, this is not our view, this is factual, but in 1980, about 1 in 1,000 homes had a computer.
Right.
Today, in the developed world, more than 920 out of every 1,000 homes owns a personal computer. And we believe that home energy storage today is kind of where the computer market was in about 1980. So there's this massive opportunity for growth and for us helping to transition to this new energy storage or energy transition, as they're calling it.
Yeah, fascinating. I was at a Cambridge Wireless event a few weeks back, and it was all focused on energy. And, we're talking about everything going electrified and people plugging in their EVs and things at 6 o'clock when they come home from work. But with the supply and demand on energy on the grid, we really do need to find more flexible ways of storing energy to be able to use it as low cost as possible. Otherwise we're going to have major problems if we don't get that now. So it sounds like, this is a really, really good solution for that.
I mean, if you look at the UK, we did a calculation, was a long time ago now, but we did a calculation that if every roof within the M25 was covered in solar panels, then the UK would, from a capacity point of view, be energy self-sufficient.
Wow.
Now, obviously, then you've got to move that around the UK and whatever, but it just shows you that the rooftops, in my view, rooftops are a real massive key to this. And then obviously what you want to do is you want to avoid transporting the electricity very far, because you lose a lot of it. So if you can store the energy where you produce it, in people's homes and in buildings and warehouses and so forth, then that's the best way to do it.
Yeah. So Faraday 2 is your product, isn't it, that you recently released a few weeks ago? So, is this available for people to use domestically now? How do they get this?
Not yet. I mean, for us, that was a kind of demonstrator, if you like, to show people the technology, to show how far we've come. We did a launch of a thing called the Faraday 1 about just over a year ago, maybe 15 months ago. And since then, what we've done is we've doubled the energy density, so the amount of energy that you can store within a kilogram. We have halved the size of that device, and we have reduced the size of the battery management system by about 85%. So we wanted to demonstrate to people how we're taking this forward. And the next step for us is working with E.ON on data sharing to develop a device for field trials, and then get to a product that we hope will be on the market, where people can buy it probably at the end of 2027, because there's just a lot of hoops that you've got to go through, and you've got to test it properly first and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that you really sort of slimmed down that product as well, because as you mentioned before, Marcus, a lot of the problem with these things is the size and the weight of batteries. I mean, just here on my desk, I've got a power bank, which is heavy. It's like a brick. But although that will charge your phone for a week, really, if you're going camping or something like that. But it's so weighty, these sorts of things.
And that's why that energy density thing is really important. And we think, we know that from the chemistry, our chemistry has about the same potential for energy storage as lithium ion. So I think we'll get there, but it's unpredictable. You never know quite how you're going to get there. It's a little bit lumpy. Sometimes a lot of progress, sometimes there's very little progress.
Yeah. So, in the future, do you envisage that Superdielectrics, once you've, really mastered this stationary storage, that you might actually move into some of these other applications, like EV or things that are actually moving?
Well, we hope so. You're just going to have to watch the space, because we can't sort of predict when those big improvements can happen. So we're just focusing on where we're already commercially viable at the moment. But yeah, we hope so. That'd be amazing. I mean, I would love that. It would be incredible if we could get there one day.
That would be awesome. So I'd like to talk about the team, if possible, Marcus, and I know quite a few of them, because back in my recruitment days, not so long ago, actually helped you guys hire some of them. So I know that if we're talking about skill sets, we're clearly talking about lots of chemistry, electronics, and physics, mechanical engineering. So that's more your engineering side. But thinking ahead of with the company's growth and how these products might develop, what kind of skill sets do you envisage that Superdielectrics might require in the future? So what I'm really trying to focus on, if somebody's at school or college at the moment and they're thinking about, right, I really, really want to work on this technology, what subjects do I need to be learning at school?
Yeah. Well, I think although, at the moment we have got a real focus on the things that you talked about: chemists, electronic engineers, material scientists, mechanical engineers, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that will always be a feature of what we're doing, because if you look at that lithium ion example, lithium ion's been going 50 years. They have already got incredible progress on their energy density, but there's a company in China which I think is the biggest battery manufacturing company, called CATL, and they have 18,000 people in their R&D departments.
Wow.
I know, that's incredible, isn't it? So, I mean, that's the kind of scale that we're talking at if you want to make big progress in these kind of technologies. So I think there'll always be a big team of chemists, electronic engineers, and all that kind of stuff. And I think those, so-called STEAM subjects are always going to be really, really important. And maths, physics, and chemistry are always going to be the building blocks. And I would really encourage people to continue with those as much as they possibly can. But in terms of the other things, there's all the other things that happen in a company, like marketing and finance and HR and office activities and all that kind of stuff. And I think the way I would kind of summarize that is, I think learning to communicate and to work with other people is really, really important. And that you can get through volunteering, sports, extracurricular activities. Jen and I were having a quick chat about the football before we started, and that, those kind of things, sports and other activities, they're a brilliant way to help you to develop those communication skills and confidence and presenting and stuff like that. And that's always going to be fundamentally important. In fact, that's even important for, people who are doing things like maths, physics, and chemistry, because every week our engineers and our scientists have to present what they're doing to the rest of the team and explain what they're doing so they all understand it. So, even if you do end up going and doing STEAM, don't think that you will be sitting in isolation your entire time. You're going to need those communication skills no matter what.
Couldn't agree more. And you mentioned sport there as a great kind of example of learning to communicate as well. Any kind of team stuff and music and things like that, we're always interested in hearing what people do outside of the lab or workshop, aren't we, to learn what makes them tick and what's going to make them a useful person to have in the team. So I know that you've got quite a few people, probably most of your team there, Marcus. Would it be right to say that they've either got a PhD or a technical degree? For somebody that hasn't got a higher education or really doesn't feel that they want to go into higher education, really that's somebody like me, I don't have a higher education. Would there be any opportunities for people to kind of work, and I'm thinking more hands-on, lab techs and things like that, or perhaps in supporting roles? Do you have anybody like that at the moment?
We do. We have some really talented and skilled lab tech people that work for us at the moment. They're doing a fantastic job. Many of them have come at it without necessarily getting degrees, and the way they've kind of approached it is going into labs and doing the very practical stuff. And of course, those lab tech roles can then lead to things like lab manager. But also, I think there's other areas of it: marketing, HR, office management, finance. All of those are essential. So I think, I'll come back to this because I know we're going to talk a bit about my own experience, but my view is that vocational training is really, really important. We focus a lot on academic training, but, just getting a summer job if you can, doing anything in and around a lab or whatever you can do to demonstrate that you've got those practical skills. I mean, it's even things, I've talked to people who are in Formula One who say that it's you can get people who are experienced on these CAD packages, which are like software packages, but the real difficulty is getting somebody to turn that into a device in the real world. So somebody who can actually make it, or can actually program a 3D printer, or can do the very practical stuff. So learning skills about, woodwork, doing stuff, making stuff in plastic, all of those very practical skills. There's an organization called Makers Fair, I think it's called, and I know they've got a big organization here in Cambridge, and I got some friends who are involved with that, and I think that's really, really important for getting those kind of practical things. And a lot of people prefer the kind of practical angle of it and come at it through a practical angle, but who end up knowing an awful lot about it because they know how to practically do it. So I think there's lots of opportunities that, but here in Cambridge, I don't know whether you already have links in with them, but the Makers organization is a brilliant thing, which I think encourages people in from a very young age. There's a lot of families go and do it, and people who are just interested to go along with the parent, or a relative or whatever, and get involved with that.
That's really good. I should definitely have a look at that and add it onto the show notes so people can explore that. But yeah, I mean, it's absolutely, you don't have to. It's not essential that you have a degree in physics or engineering and maths if you want to work in tech. The opportunities to work either hands-on or more behind the scenes, as you mentioned, in finance or HR, they're all there. Vocationally, or not having anything in that further education. The options are all there. So thinking about that future talent pool, and a few years down the road, hopefully Superdielectrics are continuing to do some awesome work and working further applications. Are you guys thinking now about where that talent pool is going to come from? And really, do you think that schools and our education providers are doing enough to ensure that we've got that homegrown talent here? And obviously, I'm not just talking about the UK, but ideally, specifically here in the Cambridge area as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's a real shame is that a lot of these kind of very technical things aren't considered to be kind of cool, as it were. And there's a lot of countries, particularly India and China, where it's a lot cooler to do those kind of subjects. We've recruited quite a few people from India because they have that kind of chemistry and background. And I know there's been a lot of talk here in the UK about programming and, saying everybody should learn to code. And I think that's it's a good initiative to get people thinking about technical subjects. But this year, over 50% of the coding in many big tech companies will be written by AI. So you may be learning a skill that could be entirely automated by AI in the future. And the CEO of NVIDIA recently said that if he was young, he'd be studying physics, not programming, as it has a wider application. And he should know. I mean, it's one of the most valuable companies in the world, and he's running it, and he's been there for a long time. So I think, stay curious. Don't underestimate both the importance of things like maths and physics, but don't worry if you don't necessarily understand it at school. There's so much on YouTube, Coursera, free courses, BBC Micro, what's it called, Sound Bites or Microbytes or something like that. There are places where you can watch the best teachers in the world for free. I mean, would you like to have Professor Brian Cox as your physics teacher? Great, you can watch him online for free. So, there are a lot of places that you can go to get this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and scientists and engineers, I find that they absolutely love talking to you about what they do and really making it simple and accessible. I mean, as I mentioned, I don't have a higher education. I've probably got a better, more in-depth knowledge of engineering and science than most people, given my career, but I didn't study any of those subjects at school. It's just, as you mentioned, Marcus, being curious and asking questions and kind of learning things your own way, and in YouTube really helps you, absorb that information in your own language. So do you think, how do you think employers can get involved with education providers to really get young people excited in this sort of technology? For example, I don't know whether Superdielectrics have ever taken on any apprentices or interns, or do you guys offer work experience? How do you collaborate with education providers on that level?
Yeah, we're maybe not such a good example, I'm afraid, because we've taken paid interns, but from local universities. So we only really do it for people who are on a university course, and there it's quite well organised, because obviously they want to get their own students into employment, because they've got a specific metric where they're judged on that. And it seems to be pretty well organised, but I think there is a real gap at school level, and I don't know quite how you fill that gap. I know that now, because quite a few schools are being run as academies, they're part of a wider group of schools. And maybe it might be possible there to have kind of careers advice, which is across a number of different schools, because I know it's normally done as a kind of part-time thing by somebody who's willing to give their time to do that career stuff. And it probably needs to be a little bit more organized than that. So at the moment, I think there is a bit of a gap, and I don't really have any constructive ideas as to how to fill that. The only thing I would say is, choose your time to look at stuff online, and look at what you look what you're interested in, or what floats your boat. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of online podcasts and stuff which will give you an introduction, and you can listen to them. And the things that really spark your curiosity, you can then go and delve into that more deeply. So that's probably what I would suggest. But at the moment, I think you're absolutely right. There is a bit of a gap at school level, and I know apprenticeships were really meant to fill that gap, but they don't seem to have quite worked. They've been about 10 years since the apprenticeship thing came back into fashion, and it hasn't quite worked the way I think they were hoping it would. So yeah, not got any good ideas for you there, I'm afraid.
No, that's okay, Marcus. Thank you. And it's good that you're paying interns as well, because it's easy just to take interns unpaid. But we all know how expensive it is to get around and so on, that you're making that, accessible for people there. So finally, I just wanted to kind of touch on you and your education and career journey. So I know that you were actually an intern, weren't you, in a bank, and you studied business and you trained as an accountant. So way back then, when you were young, Marcus,
long time ago.
I don't want to guess your age or give away your age, but I should think you were probably a 70s child, like myself, maybe.
Well, actually, no, it's even worse than that.
No, you
Yeah,
weren't
it
the
is.
60s.
Yeah.
Were you?
1967. I'm 58. Yeah.
Wow, look at you. If anybody's listening on audio, Marcus is looking very young and sprightly, can I say, with very long hair. Very long,
very long hair. Yeah.
Dark flowing hair. So when you were kind of a youngster and thinking about your studies and learning accountancy and business and banking, were you thinking about that you might be applying that into a role where you would need to learn a lot of technical terminology, and how did you find that when you ended up working in tech companies and you needed to pick that up?
Yeah, I'm afraid it was all a bit random for me. I got told that I couldn't do maths and physics at school because my grades weren't good enough, which was a real shame, because I've kind of ended up in a maths type job, and that would have been really useful. And I had to do a lot of catching up and backfilling later in life to catch up. But I got my very first job as a kitchen porter doing washing up while I was at school. And I actually wanted to work in the hotel industry. But then slightly randomly, when I was at college, I walked into Midland Bank in St Ives, which is now HSBC, or actually I think it's now closed, but it was HSBC. And I politely asked if I could speak to the manager, and I was lucky that they had a bank manager back in those days, and that the bank manager helped me and got in contact with somebody and found that there was a paid internship that they had, which was just the kindness of strangers. You know what I mean? It was I just asked. And sometimes, it's not necessarily a guaranteed way to success, but sometimes if you just ask nicely, people will help you. But it's just a question of just asking them. And I ended up studying as a chartered accountant. Which is a kind of a particular type of accountancy. And I am a really big believer in vocational training. I studied whilst I was working. And I think we need people who've got skills relevant to a job and not just academic skills only. And I think that's really important. And finding out about how to develop your communication skills, how to ask AI the right questions, and going onto a company's website and just looking at what they're doing and studying them a bit, I think is really important. Because if I know when we've interviewed people, if people come in and they know a bit about the business, even if they've got it slightly wrong, if they've tried to understand what it is that you do, and they ask some good questions and they're curious and they're kind of like interested, they're much more likely to get a job than the people who are just kind of like, well, I don't know really. So yeah, I think that's it comes back really again to those communication skills. No matter what technical skills you have or haven't got, if you turn up and ask people for help, often people will help you.
Yeah, no, that's really valuable suggestions there. Just to ask, as you did when you walked into the bank. That was amazing.
Random.
You're a bit random, brave, and sometimes you have to be brave. But there are opportunities out there for people. And look where you are now, as to when you were a youngster back in those days, wanted to be a kitchen porter, and doing something completely different. And none of us really knew what we wanted to do back then, did we? It's just the curiosity. So I think for me, the word of the day taken from this podcast is definitely going to be curiosity. What about you?
Oh, I think that's perfect. Stay curious as long as you can.
Stay curious. Well, thank you very, very much for joining us. It's only the third podcast that we've released, so really, really pleased to get you on. We'd love to have you on again in the future when Superdielectrics have moved up a notch and doing something a bit more, something else, to add to the portfolio. We'd love to hear how it's going. But thank you so much for your insights. And
thank you, Jen, and thank you for inviting me. And I hope some of this has been useful to people.
I do too. And again, if anybody's got any questions, pop them in the comments, and we'll obviously feed those through to Marcus, and he can come back and answer any questions that people have. And we'll also pop some of these other suggestions into the show notes as well, to follow up there. So again, finally, thanks to Marcus, and we're going to see you again soon for episode 4. And thanks for tuning in. Take care.
Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Bye.